the show. Jackson has stepped away for just a moment. Let's get our little clickety clack intro. Welcome to Evolution Hour on this Wednesday, the 19th of April. May. And there's our typewriters and analog clocks and all the exciting world of ancient technology. ToyTucanWordPress.com, Troubles in Paradise, Methodology of Creationism. There's a whole slew of PDFs that you can download there. To your edification and delight. And when Jackson reappears, he can introduce himself. He's in Louisiana. Are you back on the show there, Jackson? Not yet. He's in Louisiana, which has been getting some terrible storms. My sister lives in Alexandria, which is in the northern part of the state, and I think I would have heard panic-stricken Facebook announcements if there were any problems in there. I know Red Stick, aka Baton Rouge, is underneath there. Hi, everybody. Let me say hi, all. I am seeing the chat overlay. Yay!
I'm back.
Yep. I was just telling everybody that you are in Louisiana, which has been getting some terrible rains. Have you gotten any wet in your neck of the woods?
Yeah. I mean, it's been all right. It hasn't been terrible down here.
No flooding, because Baton Rouge used to look like it's been underwater.
Well, Baton Rouge is underwater. It's that Baton Rouge and New Orleans are freaking
below sea level. They can't avoid being underwater, right? Okay. Woof. Anyway,
I went to Baton Rouge for my first semester right after the freaking hurricane of 2016.
Yeah, one of my grandnephews, I think, he works down in good old Red Stick, I think, either that or Shreveport, one of the two. But anyway, my sister's up in Alexandria, so that's a slightly higher piece of real estate on there, intermingled in the vast array of green swampland that is Louisiana.
Yeah, there's nothing to look at on the entire trip from Shreveport to New Orleans. There's nothing to look at.
Yeah, it is. If you like looking at rows of trees on either side of the road.
Yeah.
And almost never across exit ramp or anything like that. Whereas if you were driving from Spokane to Seattle, you literally come through a staggering amount of real estate change from high deserts and the Columbia Gorge and mountains and vineyards and you will never see a circumstance where you will have rows of trees walling you in.
Well, RJ, to drive from Shreveport to Baton Rouge, you basically pass. There's 3 cities that you kind of pass. You pass Natchitoches at the 1 hour mark. You pass Alexandria,
which is not spelled the way it sounds.
No, it is not. It's like Natchitoches, and then you make the one turn in Opelousas. That's it. One turn the whole way.
Yeah. It's a very different environment. Anyway, enough about the travel lands criteria here. Where we need a show to do here. And we're going to be talking about moonlighting proteins and Nathaniel Jeanson misrepresenting them and Jeffrey Tompkins misrepresenting them. And then we're also going to have some fun stuff about paleolakes in Greenland that Tim Clarey has decided is a big slosh no matter what, and whatever topics additionally arise on there. But first, let me thank all of our patrons, just in case we have a stream problem and the show becomes truncated. We have our colleagues Hendril Colton, Eric Rowley, Suris, and Zeshi. Our researchers, Travis Adams, Ian Chen, Convert Me, Stephen Early, Eat Neil, James Fitzwater, History Minor, Ralph McFadden, Pelagia, Benjamin Simpson, Speed of Sound, and Studio Deem Wing, a new one from last week. Assistant researchers, Command Cyborg, Doranku, Jelly, Totus Real, and Christopher Johnson, and friends Steve Bauman, Marigail Beddoes, Daniel, Insects Are Cool, Morton Nielsen, Paul the Skeptic, Puffalopius, Bo Rasmussen, Kevin Reeves, Alex Stone, and Paul Williams, and our legacy patrons. Oh, History Minor is in there. Hi, History.
Yay!
And our legacy patrons, I will continue to thank Jen, Jody, Mike, John, Keith, Andrew, Dyer, Yui, Mona, Brad, Daniel, Danya, Staggle, Sun, Skystone, Ugly German Truths, Everett, and Sewer. You've been helpful at all stages in this matter. It is possible that in about a week, I may be debating Sal Cordova on intelligent design. And I would like he's going to present something new. No, not particularly. The fun part will be what my presentation hopefully will be, which is about what I wanted the topic to be.
Okay.
Because I wanted the topic to be, is there even an intelligent design model? Can there be one? And he didn't want to be that debate.
Is there one? No. Could there be one theoretically? Yeah.
Yeah, questionable. And the thing is that Sal objected immediately to that debate title. And I'm willing to go with that. He wants to present the dangling intelligent design evidence, which we've pretty seen an awful lot of on, and I'll be happy to discuss all of that stuff along the way, winging it. But I was sort of prodded into this because Erica had her discussion with Gunter Beckley. Did you catch that one, Jackson?
Oh God, RJ, isn't it like 4 hours?
Almost,
3 hours?
yes. I'm not even completely finished with it. I still got about an hour or so to go on it, but it is a gold mine of
I'm sorry.
Beckleyism.
I got the synopsis from you guys, and I don't know if I could stomach watching 4 hours of Gunter Beckley.
It takes stomach, yes, but I've been transcribing verbatim big swaths of what he says because it's relevant for my method study to see what's going on in that guy's head, that he could think some of the things he does. But anyway, one of the big points that Erica made in the show was that intelligent design doesn't have a model. And she pressed Beckley on the model issue. And he says, well, there could be a model. And it could be like quantum phenomenon, maybe, which is functionally acknowledging that he doesn't have a model.
Yeah, no, of course he doesn't. It's the same old
not Darwinism, not gradualism.
Yeah, it's the same old, these are problems for evolution, therefore they must be intelligent design, therefore I don't really have to produce a model.
He accepts the reptile mammal transition though.
Well, I mean, yeah, but didn't Michael Denton said he did also, and I think didn't even deal with it. So,
and he accepts common ancestry, and so what it means is, what the hell does he mean by that? When exactly is the designy parts coming in? Right. If we're talking about common ancestry, and the really big press announcement has to do with the paper that Beckley is doing on whales. That's pending somewhere. Yeah, and whether it definitely, he just put up a posting of this is a digression. Beckley and Hossier and Ann Gager had done a paper in the Journal of Theoretical Biology on the waiting time problem.
Play.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is that it's a really remarkably long paper. And I brought it to Dan Stern Cardinale's attention for him to take a little look at it, and he gave some rather interesting little comments about the problems with it. It's deck stacking. It's a lot of presupposition. Oh, Vandalia says, hey, this Monday, if you are both free, boom-a-da-boom, like to tackle plants, how about we tackle our closer cousins of the fungus? Whee! I must say, I'm not terribly informed on fungi, other than my understanding that fungi have cooperated or enslaved, depending on your point of view, some bacteria to make lichens.
Oh, we can talk about, the Ascomycota, the Basidiomycota, the Zygomycota. We could talk about the Chytridiomycota.
Your show, then, yeah, and the fungi, and then also the whole issue about where they fit in to the systematics. My understanding is that fungi, even though we can't verify it, they are very probably Precambrian.
Oh no, they are. We do have Precambrian fossils of fungi. There's Orosphera geraldiae, which is about 1 point. It's like just over 1 billion years old.
Yeah, so that's in the early wind-up part, and in many, given how intricate and weird fungi are, and how pervasive and utterly indestructible. In fact, is there any evidence that fungi have ever been impacted by a mass extinction?
Not that I can think of off the top of my head.
Yeah, I can't think of any. The insects are almost indestructible. They got a slight speed bump during the Permian, and that's kind of about it. But they're remarkably resilient. But when I think about it, I go, fungi, they just go, mass extinction? What mass extinction? We're having fun.
I mean, yeah, because they're, what do they live on? A lot of them live on like detritus, decaying plant matter, things like that. So if everyone else is dying, they're like, we're okay.
Dinner.
Yeah, dinner, pretty much. So.
Yeah, and there's so many of the interesting biological systems and things can be related to in the fungal groups, and so that's part of that giant windup before we get to the Ediacara metazoans. That's one of the arguments been made by McKennahan, who's an oddball, but nonetheless, I think it's a valid issue to raise. Is the question whether the Ediacara had really deep endosymbiotic symbioses with bacteria and stuff in their biology. That's maybe reasons why they go in the directions that they do and lead off to elderware. Beach, hi RJ, hi Beach. The only fungi Vandalia messes with is in Super Mario Brothers. Well, I enjoy fungi on my salads and with steaks. And such like that, and that's very selective, and away we go. And I try not to think about the variegated sex life of fungi while eating them. Anyway, so let's get on to the happy show here. Our continuing analysis of replacing Darwin from Nathaniel Jeanson. He starts off with a hilarious footnote. Where he's got a bit where he's talking about not all mutation changes affect protein functions. He's got a paragraph on that, and he puts a footnote in. And the footnote is to see any standard biochemistry textbook. Why couldn't you just put that in the main text?
Well, RJ.
What the hell did he need a footnote for? I mean, if he didn't, then that would mean there would have been just one footnote on the page instead of two. So that then leads to the second footnote, which is about moonlighting proteins. And moonlighting proteins are not proteins that operate as bartenders during the evening and then improv actors during the day. They are proteins that have multiplex functions in relation to different regulatory networks that are really very different depending upon their context. And this naturally, Jeanson decides, well, that's big thing for not evolution, right? Apparently, the scientists haven't got that memo because they keep on thinking of it in evolutionary terms. And not only that, but Jeffrey Tompkins, a couple years previous in 2015, had said Moonlight Proteins befuddle evolution. And I'll be putting that ICR link up, which was actually citing and misrepresenting a technical paper on the role of gene duplication in the process. And that's open access, so I'll be sticking that in here. But anyway, what was funky, one of the articles that he cited, that Jeffrey cited, or that Jeanson cited, was Moonlighting Proteins, Old Proteins Learning New Tricks by Christine Jeffrey in Trends in Genetics. Unfortunately, not available open access, but I will be putting the whole reference to it in there so those who can squeak into it can find it that way. But it was bringing up pesky little facts because some of these moonlighting proteins cause disease in the moonlighting context. And Alzheimer's, and so one of the reasons why it is have medicinal problems is that if you're trying to target the protein, stop its disease function, what's going to prevent it from stopping the normal function of the protein in its non-moonlighting mode? And then the other issue is the other is which one is the original function of the protein. The only reason why they start calling it moonlighting is they found one version first and another one later on. Which one was the original dynamic system going on in here? Anyway, needless to say, Jeanson neglects to mention that disease aspect of it, but Tompkins kind of alluded to it. And for him, he sees that as, like the fall. That if there's any bad things that are happening about it, it's all due to that. So it can't possibly be due to the fact that the designer creates dangerous stuff as part of the process. So we can't ever do that. Nope. That's not permitted.
Can't happen.
Anyway,
Impossible.
yeah. And so the other paper that Jeanson cited in this 2 footnote thing that actually had some sources was by a paper from 2010, which was at least more recent, Huberts and Vanderklay, which was basically a review of the state of the art in 2010 about how many moonlighting proteins were known and their context in that, and it's very thorough. And it's also noting that downside aspect, the Alzheimer's thing, and the clues on their evolutionary origin and selection dynamics. So it's fascinating to compare the exploratory, detail-oriented, we have this to account for, and this to account for, and this is a puzzle, and this is what we need to deal with view that happens on the evolutionary side, and the gee whiz, not Darwinism, or I'm not going to go into details mode of Jeanson and Tompkins. Two separate creationists, both ricocheting off of the same topic and giving you no new knowledge in the process.
Right.
Wow. Oh, Ian Chan. Hi, Ian.
Hi,
Saying hi to
Ian.
Jackson and RJ. We gave you a definite thanks for being a patron of the project. And how are things in distant, faraway land? It was I was sort of delayed earlier in the thing, and we might as well call attention to this because this relates to other topics that we're going to be dealing with in future, and is relating to how we deal with both social and medical issues. Because there was just a new report on the NPR PBS NewsHour about the various products that are marketed to largely women, but also men of dark, black, Hindu, other various skin complexions around the world to lighten them skin to look more beautiful, like only lightness and whiteness is beautiful. And that this colorism is not only serious in terms of cultural thing, but also dangerous because some of the products have mercury in them. They're actually physically dangerous. Major cosmetic companies are marketing big time in the Philippines and in India and other places, and they were showing advertisements and things of examples of these things and trying to communicate, trying to find out from Johnson and Johnson and Olay and that, what exactly is your position on this, and moves in foot by various contacts with people in Congress that have gotten on this. That are trying to get the Food and Drug Administration engaged in it for those that are marketed in the United States. And so in this modern era where you would go, excuse me, but your skin color is your skin color. This is not a thing you need to change.
Yeah, that's
this
pretty
is
wonky.
not. Yeah, that they and Jackson hadn't even realized this was a thing.
I was not aware this was a thing.
As one of the interviewers was pointing out, white people don't know about this because they're not being marketed to white people. Nobody needs to lighten up my skin. I'm already in the tone that's within the beautiful range. Well, I'm sorry, I missed the boat. I'm not more beautiful just because I got white skin. And the fact is that many amazingly beautiful people, the standards of symmetry and all the other rules that we use that don't have anything to do with skin color, is that no, this is an inappropriate thing to do. And because some of this is being pushed that has dangerous side effects, either that or it doesn't do a damn bit of good or simply puts blotches on the skin afterwards. And there are some people who have such bad reactions to it over time that they can't go outside because they're now super sensitive to sunlight. This is crazy, Looney Tunes. And it's appropriate that we would get it to stop. So this is all part of how businesses that make stuff market things based upon prejudices that then become an economic factor that then produces a self-sustaining cycle that they don't want anybody to interfere with because it's making the money. Is this in principle any different than the pharmaceutical companies that were marketing opioids so relentlessly? I don't think so. It's same ballpark. It's trying to make money off of a market. The only difference with the opioids is that it's addictive, and so they have a captive market in that thing, and it had more vicious and immediate health side effects. But it's still appealing to things that are not reasonable.
Right.
And all of that then goes into the mindsets of why people are okay with that kind of thing, or at least for a while. And so there's going to have to be a cultural change on there where people stop viewing this. And this apparently has been a long-standing cultural trope in India, because India had been run by the British since the 18th century. So this is ingrained in them, that you find that even in reflecting caste systems, it's no coincidence that that Aryan bit that popped up with the Nazis, the Aryans are the lighter skinned population of India. And that these things have been knocking around in prejudicial ideas about what is considered beautiful, what are considered standards of beauty, and all the rest. That go back long before oil of Olay got into some of the forms. Some of them, they decided just to change the names so that they would instead call it whitening. Instead of white formula, it's a beautiful skin formula or something like that instead. Like, no, you're missing the point here. You need to stop selling it as a doctor.
Right.
Yeah. So we got that little part in there. It's a matter that we'll be connecting up. We may or may not allude to it in some of the issues about the racism issue and accusations of racism that pop up regarding Charles Darwin and company. There was just a recent posting just today about complaints about Thomas Huxley. And there's a school in Washington that wants to remove Thomas Huxley from the picture because of his, air quotes, racism. Never mind that he became an abolitionist and wanted equality of all people in the end, and all of that. They can kind of latch onto it. And guess what? Some of these accusations that were made against Huxley come from the Henry Morris creationism era. Yeah, it's it goes through that an awful lot, and you find this the same trope popping up a lot in intelligent design apologetics. Richard Weikert in particular is just the obsessive on this matter that's been going in. He pops up in the Expelled video, and he's constantly being churned around in culture camp conservatism land. So that's going to be more topics to discuss. And I think it gives us fresh perspective on the fact that we're now in a new era, that we've moved into the Me Too and Black Lives Matter, and different perspectives about what is considered normative anymore. So did you have any interest on the expanding on the whole Moonlight protein thing, which from my perspective is like the fascinating bit about how much evolution is tinkering and how it can go in umpteen different directions inside of a single biochemistry, developing all sorts of little side issues, some of which can be deleterious, because that's how diseases can come up, because there's no designer there to pull a halt to it. Things can go and be promiscuous and do stuff, and there's nobody to say, whoa, wait a minute, that's not part of the plan.
I do think that's very interesting. I was not aware of that. And so I think that's pretty neat.
Yeah, it's a relatively new field, because I said the 2010 paper will get you up to speed. It's on virtually every taxa that you find and the only reason why they weren't previously known is because no one was looking for them. That in part it came from that era when they were envisaging one gene, one protein.
Right.
And this they had to start wrapping their heads once they started seeing alternative splicing and rampant pleiotropism. By the way, one of the things that first got me intrigued by why Michael Denton was screwing up was how cavalier he was about pleiotropisms in biology. He casually referred back in his 1985 book to pleiotropisms are invariably species specific. And you go, but if you accept speciation, which you supposedly do, Michael, isn't that a clue as to how speciation is occurring? The fact that pleiotropisms can develop? Shouldn't that be little alarm bells of mechanism coming off here? But yet nothing like that happened with it, because everything is a series of disconnected dots that never get put together, whereas an evolutionary model sees everything as pieces of a gigantic interacting whole, and you want to make sense of it all.
You have to be one with the whole.
Yes, yeah. And that's probably, I think that's one of the things that can be most intimidating for people who dive into evolution, is if they're comfortable with tunnel vision specificity, they can do what your Michael Behe will be. He's the biochemist, or they're the system biologist, or they're the this, or they're the that. But if you look at the cutting edge of where science is going, whether it's in Evo Devo land or the kinds of stuff that Neil Shubin and all the rest are doing, they're like dust bunny magnets of all the disciplines together. That you need to pay attention simultaneously to developmental biology and genetics and ecology and paleontology and geology and climatology and
Yeah.
and that means cross-boundary, cross-fertilization, to realize that you can't view and try to make sense of life by looking at just what the little molecule does in the test tube. You have to see how it relates to the whole organism, and the organism with all of its alleles, and the organism with alleles as a member of a population, and the member of the population in an interaction with predators and plays and parasites and climate things and rivers coming down and monsoon cycles and all these other things. And most people don't have minds that can multi-level at that degree. And what you need, what ends up doing, is you have a series of very talented experts who are all seeing the need to do this, and they're starting to work together as a collective to try to put all the pieces together, because each one of them will know their specialized discipline. Well, this ain't what's going on over in creationism land.
No, it really isn't.
There was a concept that I brought up in the old tip work called Xenoslicing, and for those who don't know what that is, I think I described it in chapter 1 or 2, somewhere around in there. Anyway, Xeno was the old Greek guy who thought he could disprove motion.
Yeah.
He had Achilles and the tortoise in a race, and he said, okay, Achilles gives the tortoise a head start, okay? And then after the tortoise has gone a ways, Achilles starts forward, and he reaches the point where the tortoise was. Meanwhile, the tortoise has moved forward a little. And the Achilles reaches that point, and meanwhile, the tortoise has moved forward a little. And that means that Achilles can never catch up, because wherever he gets to the point where the tortoise has moved on a little more. And you're going, right. wait a minute, there's a problem here.
There's a problem here. It takes a step. I disproved your argument.
And the problem was, Zeno never thought of velocity. So he had a conceptual problem. And B, he was trying to do something that he couldn't do mathematically, which is add up an infinite series. He needed calculus. And once you do calculus, you could show there will be a point when Achilles will reach the stage where it's passing the tortoise. Easy peasy calculus problem. And all you need to know are the various rates of speed and all that kind of stuff, and what head starts and so forth and so on. It's a relatively simple problem. But the mathematics didn't exist. So that's a partly nod to how he could get into this. And he was being very a priori. But anyway, xenoslicing is the term that I used to describe a person that tries to dissolve a problem by carving it up in little teeny pieces so that they're all separate and nothing connects up.
Right.
And creationists do this on a colossal scale. You find most ideologues will do that. If you jump into a climate science denier, they're xenoslicing like mad. You get into this tunnel vision where you're looking at one little temperature thermometer in Greenland and the kinds of things flitting around with it. And it's designed to focus you into the point where you're not looking at the big picture. And so you're never noticing that Achilles has just raced past that damn tortoise.
I actually had that conversation with a climate denier a couple weeks ago. He was saying, well, one of the things he said was, oh, look, the water isn't rising in this one area. And it's like, you know how averages work, right, my guy? No.
And also, there's other factors that have to be taken into consideration, which brings up in paleoclimate, that the ice age is relatively recent. Ice is heavy. And what happens is that gigantic multi-mile thick glaciers actually physically push the land down by their weight, which means that it squishes everything out and displaces lakes and does all sorts of weird stuff around the periphery. Well, once the ice melts, like the skin, boom, it rebounds, but that takes time. And so various areas will be rebounding. The same thing happens with the fact that these earthquakes that have occurred as fracking has pumped oil out of places, meaning you have a whole bunch of fissures that weren't there before. And so the subsidence takes place because you now have nothing holding it up. And so all of these variables have to be taken into account on the kinds of things. There are some areas that will be rising for a variety of reasons. There are other factors have to do with the fact that there's a certain amount of sea level rise that occurs automatically because when the temperature rises, the water expands a teeny bit. Now, calculate that over an ocean. Whoa. We know there's dynamics going on because of the fact we've got two big oceans, the Atlantic cluster and the Pacific. And they have different sea levels relative to the Panama Canal. You think, if the cliche that water always reaches a fixed level, the sea level should be the same on both sides. But no, one is different than the other because one's a great big ocean and the other one's a smaller ocean, and the thing it fills is varying. So literally, the ingress and the egress of the canal aren't at the same altitude. So those are all of the complicated variables that go on in there. We know that Miami in Florida is seeing increasing amounts of water lapping up, and during storm surges, the water is spooshing up like geysers from the drainage ditches in there. And so it's only a matter of time. If all the modeling suggests that as the sea level, it doesn't have to rise a lot to say bye-bye to a lot of Florida, or to turn it into a place, that needs gondolas and canals to be able to get around because you're marginally underwater. Even a city like New York City, that's much farther north, has similar problems, that they get constant flooding now. And the subways sometimes have to shut down during storm surges because so much of that South Manhattan was built on landfill that's extremely porous and just at sea level. And in fact, you want to see where all the bedrock is in New York City? It's real easy to spot. It's where all the skyscrapers are.
Of course. Yeah.
You want to see where there ain't bedrock? No skyscraper. So you can just measure it right way up, going up the thing that the super tall buildings and the not super tall buildings, as to whether they can get down to it. And if you do a map of where they've been having flooding problems in New York City now, surprise, surprise, it's where all the landfill was that had been filled in, that used to be just swamp and periphery. The island is much bigger. The same thing has happened in San Francisco. You have a circumstance there where the bay used to be bigger than it is. And you've got it's where they're drawing. Another factor that's changing, that can change the dynamics, is when you're drawing water off of the rivers that feed into the bay. And so it can get to the point where things can actually go the opposite direction. Salt Lake went through a big mutation period. And there's only one river, the Jordan, I think. Everything's got biblical names down there. That comes in. And because of that, there was a period for a while when the lake was dropping down. And so there was this resort salt air that had to be moved out farther into the lake because of the dropping sea level, dropping lake level. Well, the paleoclimatology people were saying, the lake levels that we see now are atypical for Great Salt Lake, that normally the lake is way bigger than that. And it's now started to go back to its normal mode, which means that the lake has been expanding. And they now are having to worry about whether they need to move the interstate highway because it's going to be underwater. They've literally had to move the famous Promontory, Utah meeting of the rails national monument. That's not where it used to be. Because where it used to be is underwater now. They physically had to move the whole monument. It was like Abu Simbel when they had to take that apart and built a gigantic replica hill at higher altitude when they did the Aswan High Dam. It was really funky, but I didn't know until I saw a documentary on it. When you see they've meticulously recreated Abu Simbel and put all the stones back. But the point is, it was originally just cut into the hillside of dirt. So that it's now in an artificial hill that's actually essentially a giant concrete bunker. And if you look at come in from the backside, it looks like a big industrial facility because it's all facade for the front end that's supposed to look like the way it was in 1920.
Right.
At a lower altitude. Anyway, New York City is going to be facing a big problem because you don't need much sea level rise. 6 inches, not feet, but a small amount means that storm surges are going to be progressively worse. And some places have already dealt with these kinds of things because if you're familiar with the Thames estuary, they had to build a gigantic storm surge system years ago. It cost billions of pounds. And on an even more gigantic scale, Holland, which is mostly underwater, so they really pay attention to this, has built a fantastically extensive system of expanded floodplains. But in New York's case, their really only option is to build a storm surge system across the Verrazano Narrows where the bridge is. And that is not a tiny thing to do. So, and would be colossally expensive, but otherwise they're going to be having constant flooding 50 years from now from that. They'll even, and it depends on how big they build the damn thing, because the Thames system is actually at the edge of its viability because the water level has been rising beyond what they had expected it to, if memory serves. Oh, yikes. Anyway, so we are at a little past the half hour, on to part 2. We don't want to forget Tim Clarey and the Greenland paleolake. Tim Clarey is our marvelous creationist geologist, the one who's addicted to mega sequences that we've mentioned on previous shows and discussed in the rocks were there. Clarey is a doctrinal young Earth creationist who never met a spot he didn't think was the flood. and in this case, had to do with Greenland paleolakes. Now, for those in the know, Greenland is covered with glaciers and melting. So you got all these very, very ancient lakes, and they do ice cores down into them, and these things go back a colossal amount of time, which of course creationists don't allow there either. We discussed some of that in Rocks for There. And but anyway, you got this thing with this under the ice. They can do seismic analyses to the bedrock where used to be no ice on it. And they can tell from the characteristics of the ripples and things that they can detect. Isn't that neat? That there was once an ancient lake back before the ice covered it over. And there were paleolakes that they were able to determine. And that's telling them about drainage systems in the ancient Greenland system. And unless you can drill down and get samples, all you can really tell from it is what kind of lake and the physical extent of it and so forth and so on. And it refers in particular to a 2021 paper, because this is a brand new creationist spiel on it. I'll be putting the link up to a Science Direct because it's open access from Paxman. Anyway, Clarey is sure that this paleolake is actually just stuff reflecting the flood. Now, you go out to your local lake and decide that that lake is actually the flood, okay? Because that's functionally what this guy's doing.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, History Minder says, Abu Simbel, sacrificing history for the greater good, I guess. Well, it's always the issue of whether or not they wanted to build the damn dam, the Aswan High Dam. And the same thing goes in spades with the Three Gorges Dam in China, which is regarded as a serious ecological mess. They still have conniption fits, and rightly so, frankly, for the building of the Grand Canyon Dam north of the Grand Canyon, which created the lake up there and filled in classic canyons that all we have are pictures of what they used to look like. In my neck of the woods, I have never seen the natural Columbia River. The Columbia River is not a natural river in the entire state of Washington. It's a series of dams, to the point where there's ships and even tourist ships go all the way up into Midland, Washington State, up the Columbia River to Kennewick and that. And barges bring products back and forth because it's way cheaper than railroad and all that stuff. So the river, when you see the Columbia River, it looks like not a lake, but it's really wide, and in parts would be similar to what you would see with the Mississippi River, which can even get wider than that. But that's not what the natural Columbia River would look like. If there were no dams there, it would look like a little itty bitty ditch with water running down the river. And there were heavy rapids and things, and you still have snippets of that down in the Dalles and that farther downstream past the dams. And there are Indian fishing right issues, and there complaints about whether or not they have gibs as opposed to other fishermen and all this kind of stuff. So it's still controversial to this day. We still have the circumstance of how to maintain the salmon runs up the streams, and the Salmon River comes into the Columbia at one point. So this is all a big ecological circumstance. Well, I have never seen the Columbia River in its native state. I've seen photographs of what it looks like, and there's an awful lot of major rivers that have those characteristics. We pretty much are running out of major river systems that you can do hydroelectric installations like that with. And so it's not really a viable option from a climate change point of view. And it has ecological contexts in changing the structure of things. It's been a gigantic boon for the Pacific Northwest because we have part of the reason we have a wine industry in the state is because, one, we have all this glacial loess that got dumped on the place from runoffs from the Ice Age period. Very specialized soil. Loess, yes, L-O-E-S-S, loess. And it's not like other kinds of soil, and there's little snippets of it still left because when the Columbia floods came through, it carved away big channels in it, so you'll have these escarpments with loess on top. Loess predates the floods, and but then you mix in the fact that the Columbia River Gorge provided irrigation water, so we have a mammoth network of what's basically a high desert where they can control exactly the amount of water being pumped out of the Columbia River and for irrigation purposes. And so our grape growing region is the same latitude as France. And we can control the water precisely, and it's a relatively dry climate otherwise, which is perfect for wine.
RJ, so would you say you have a lot of loess?
We got a lot of loess here. Nick Zentner would call it. A reason I can remember it is because he makes such a big deal out of it. That it's a really fine grain. It's like chalk dust kind of stuff, and it's very specialized. And it's one of the reasons why the soils in this area are so fantastically productive to the point where they can do multiple crops a year. I mean, it's just colossal if they got the water, which they would when they pump it in from the Columbia River, which is now a series of nested lakes. The weirdest thing I ever saw, there's always a bit of wind on the Columbia River. This is a weird digression. Go with me on it. And so the Columbia River, I have only once in my life did I ever see the Columbia River without any ripples on it. And it was driving down on a little adventure we were doing one time, and I think it was like February or something. And the Columbia River was like glass. It was the most eerie thing I've ever seen because you never go across. There's a windsock on the Vantage Bridge when you cross the Columbia River on the interstate system there because it gets so many winds, and if it's really windy, watch out because it's dangerous because things can just be torrential through there. Right. But this particular one was down more towards Portland, and it was just like a mirror. And my brother had to stop the car, and we had to take a picture of the damn thing because you're going, whoa. Yeah. And I've never, and this was like 50 years ago, and I've never, in the various times that I've been down there, I've never seen anything like that ever since. It's just quite strange. Anyway, that is pretty cool. Side light and alternate. I don't know whether anything like that will occur on the Mississippi, and that the Mississippi, of course, is such a extremely long, windy river, and you can easily cross back and forth across it multiple times. And of course, the river has a tendency to want to change course. That's another thing. When you get down into your neck of the woods down there in Louisiana, there's the battle between the river and the Army Corps of Engineers, because the river wants to shift position to a new course, and that means bypassing all the towns that are dedicated to it. And so the Army Corps of Engineers is trying to, levee and channel it. Long term, I'm betting on the river.
I mean, yeah, probably ultimately.
Yeah, a different dynamic that's going on there. But any of that where we're interfering with the natural environment on that scale, it has plus sizes and downsizes. I don't think there's any likelihood that although there are moves to stop some and deactivate some of the dams in the area to bring back some of the salmon things, because that's been actually a problem. Salmon are finicky and don't they smell the river and they go back to the place, and the dams don't help that much, and they kind of confuse them, and to the point of where the salmon runs are potentially threatened, and there's a huge industry involving that, a lot of monetary circumstances to there. So you have this incredible juggling act of competing interests. Anyway, back to Clarey and his damn Greenland lakes. Well, gear shift. This sort of thing is occurring all around the world, around the periphery of glacial zones. And if you think about it, the same phenomenon would have been occurring with all paleolake glaciers. So, in fact, glacial flooding, like the Missoula floods, took place with the Silurian glaciations in the southern hemisphere back, 300 million years ago? 200, 300 million years ago?
Yeah.
And because they found traces of some of that, it's much harder to locate a lot of those signs, and we alluded to it in rocks are there.
The rocks are there.
Yeah, because of the fact that these phenomenon are continuing to go. I think we referred to it there. If not, it's going to be in the next book. It pops up somewhere in there, because it's such an intriguing sense of the larger history of things, that these processes occur as natural byproducts. And what happens when you have these burying lakes? There used to be a paleo lake. Well, Spokane is distinctive because we were never covered with ice. The glaciers never got this far south. They got farther south in other areas in the state. And there's sections where literally on the interstate, when you go to Seattle, you can drive through a spot where the glaciers were. And that's about the only spot on the entire Interstate 90 that you can say that because the glaciers were farther north. But here we had a lake that wasn't even discovered. It wasn't realized there was a paleo lake here in Spokane until really about 25 years ago. And when they realized that the sediments and the stuff that was being laid down didn't make sense if there had been a flood coming through a place without a lake. Instead, it was doing what happened in Coeur d'Alene. Lake Coeur d'Alene is the lake that's just to the east of us over in Idaho. And the lake was there when the Missoula floods spilled down. And what happens is you have a flood water coming down a catastrophe with all of this debris and gunk in it, rocks and trees and all this other stuff that it's picking up along the way. And it slams into the lake and it slows a little, enough that some of the stuff settles out. Very distinctive kinds of stuff. Hydrologic sorting. For real. And that same kind of stuff is here in Spokane without a lake. And that means that when that was happening, there was a lake there. And it's been called Lake Columbia now. And so the more recent work on the Missoula floods will refer to that blob of water there, Lake Columbia, where Spokane is now, and then Lake Coeur d'Alene and other kinds of things that flow along there. So that's one of the funkiest things about paleoclimate work in this context, that Clarey is stumbling around in this paleo lake underneath Greenland ice sheets, is that times change. And so lakes come and go, sea levels rise and fall, lake levels rise and fall, as land masses move, you can have situations, Nick Zentner was lecturing again about the fact that in one of his recent college lectures, as Silesia, which is this blob of segment of volcanic super plateau that was formed largely underwater in the Pacific Ocean, gradually got closer and closer to the westward moving North American continent, and they start filling in. First, you create like a fill-in zone. So you have all these rivers that are coming down from the east, not yet the Rocky Mountains because they haven't started appearing yet. And eventually there's a shift over where the land has bulged up in such a way that it's changed the drainage patterns, and you started getting rivers coming off of the east, going eastward from this semi-range that's formed from this remnant of Silesia. And so you get this incredible juggling act of things that you have to look at it on a fine-grained level of this period versus this period versus this period versus this period. And you can do that in this gigantic picture puzzle that's working through time that you find in the actual geological literature. Then you move over to creationism land.
Yeah, it's not quite the same over there.
Oh no, you get nothing but vague cartoons. it's like switching from Lawrence of Arabia high definition detail to Rocket J Squirrel and Bullwinkle the Moose cartoon. Except not funny.
Yeah, except it's not very funny.
Yeah. Rocket J Flying Squirrel and Rocky and Bullwinkle are perfect examples of the most rudimentary animation used in cartoons. By their own admission, they were not attempting to be sophisticated animators, and so it's basically still pictures with the mouth not even moving half of the time, as opposed to the relatively sophisticated animation you got with Warner Brothers and Bugs Bunny cartoons. But remember, Rocky and Bullwinkle were done for TV, whereas the Bugs Bunny cartoons were not made for TV. They were movies. They were shown in movie theaters as a short, along with short films. And so they had the budget they could do for a motion picture environment on there. So they had much more sophisticated animation. And it didn't get leaner and sadder until the 1960s, when the studio system was breaking down and Warner Brothers was running out of money, and they couldn't afford to pay the big orchestra anymore, and they couldn't afford the better animation and the time consuming to make more animation frames and all that. And so if you look, you can easily track this. This is geek territory, that if you watch, just track the history of Roadrunner cartoons, and you can tell when it was made by the quality of the animation and the quality of the music. And that it starts out very sophisticated animation and really powerful music. And as the time goes on from the 50s into the 60s, by the time it gets down to Lava, I think was the name of the guy that was doing the music by that time, the early 1960s, it's almost at Rocky and Bullwinkle level. Anyway, it would be nice if Andrew Snelling or Tim Clarey or any of them could even get to Rocky and Bullwinkle level, because they just don't have enough detail on it. They just have this catch-all flood. Well, if there was a flood that was causing that paleolake, what was going on right next to the paleolake? And what was going on next to the paleolake? And what was going on south of the paleolake? And how exactly did the ice get there? And when was that? Before or after the 15th of October, 2320 BC? When exactly? Can we be a little bit more specific about that? And no. I would contend yeah, exactly. No, you've saved us a lot of time, Jackson. That's never going to happen. That they're never going to get past the cartoon level. And the reason is we've had a track record on this, that this argument was being presented by George McCready Price back in the 1920s, and all the various creation science that really started kicking in high gear in the 1970s on. And that's when you started getting your Steve Austin, who was writing under a pseudonym. I think, what was it, Neville or Nevins or something like that. He was writing under a pseudonym. Didn't even want to write under his own name for quite a while. Yeah. Stuart Nevins, I think it was the thing. We allude to it in our rocks were there. And I think we keep the Nevins stuff separate in the bibliography because it's technically under that name, but it's by the same guy. In the same way, John Woodmarapp is not John Woodmarapp. He's John Texas, and he never writes under his own actual name. And even once in a while, you get the issues of how many creationists write under the anonymous category at their websites. So,
like Krieger.
Yeah. To whether they're just too tricky on. And the only reason that one I went into in vicious detail in the rocks were there. Charles Krieger is with CMI and that, and he's been connected with that for years. But the posting he did on the reptile mammal transition is not listed under his name. It's just anonymous. And the only reason why old fart RJ knew it was Krieger is because I had a printout of the original version of that argument that Krieger posted under his own name online. And I printed the bloody thing. It's not available anywhere. It's been vaporized online, but I have a hard copy printout, and I could track and this is the same argument, and he's just buffed it up and adjusted it. And I discussed the various tweaks and things and how he tweaks some of it around, including that glorious one where he decided a particular therapsid was a rat.
Yeah, he said, wasn't it Morganucodon? He said was a mouse, which is just
something like
bonkers.
That. Yeah.
Yeah, that's bonkers.
Well, it's sort of like a mouse because it looks like a little fur ball.
Yeah.
And that's all it takes because we only need that little light morphology angle. But sorry about that.
If you don't know anything whatsoever about functional morphology, sure, it looks exactly like a mouse.
And to be fair, if there's anybody that doesn't know anything at all about functional morphology, it would be Charles Krieger.
I mean, you're not wrong, RJ. So.
Yeah. I mean, he's got the qualifications for that in the Vengeance, but that means that we're in just that bad of a state. Worse when you get over to the other creationists like McCain and others, or McLean, who do have paleontology expertise allegedly, and yet are still making blundering arguments about these issues. To this day, in part in response to criticizing said book, Evolution Slam Dunk, which we'll be alluding to in a little info box thing in the new volume, because this stuff has just come on since Rocks Were There came out. It's kind of juicy little bit. We want to keep everything up to date and make sure we've got all that stuff in there. So it's quite clear that we're never going to be at a loss for grist for our mill.
This is true.
Yeah, and in fact, there's an advantage to be working as a team this way because there's so much information that's incoming that it's very difficult for a single person to keep up with it all. That you can easily become completely swamped, and the idea that people can specialize I could highly recommend the idea that have a writing partner with a different set of expertise is really useful because it's that division of labor, and you can split things up to where you can pool resources and time on a scale. Two researcher minds can get done much better than together than they can separately. The sum is more than the sum of its parts in that. Now, whether there's a dynamic, whether you have too many cooks in the broth, whether when you get past 3 and 4 and more collaborators, then you're in a different dynamic. Really, you need to deal with the anthology route where everybody does their separate chapter, and then there's somebody that acts as an overall editor.
RJ, where too many creationists spoils the math.
Yes, that is a. Where did we write that? Oh, yeah. That for those who haven't bought the book, and shameless plug, why not? Oh, I should set up a thing because we're near the end of the hour, and then I should put up our commercial for the work. This referred to the infamous Claude Bertholdt, the creationist sedimentology guy that's constantly referenced. This is not some little obscure straw man. This guy is one of their alleged heavy guns, and all he's basically done is show that laminations can take place. Like, this was not exactly a news bulletin. But the funky part was that he has gotten in collaboration with this oddball husband and wife Russian creationist couple who have done a lot of weird little sub papers over the years in Russia and in the Russian creationist movement. And Berthold wrote a paper that was reprising some of their information on this particular deposit. And the problem is that they listed the data. So the same topic is listed in both of these papers, one of which was co-written by Berthold and the other one wasn't. And the numbers aren't the same. And it's clear that although the numbers at least added up in the earlier version, in the Berthold version, they don't even add up.
The math is not good.
That's when we decided that too many creationists spoil the math.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, whenever you think that there is some limit to just how gobsmackingly stupid creationists can be, how poorly reasoning they can do, how ineptly misrepresentative they can be. Somebody comes down the road and does something like you go, whoa.
I mean, well, RJ, to be fair, Ariel Roth literally made up some numbers.
Yeah. And boy, that was a tough topic to track down all the details on, because so much of it was available in they were very old works. And what's neat about it is I suspect that if we had tried to do this book 5 years ago, we couldn't have tracked down all that stuff.
Well, RJ, I think we were just lucky on that one. I mean, the most papers from that time period aren't online, so we really got lucky with that paper.
Yeah, that one old book, the fact that it turned out to be online, and some of these when you think about some of these obscure Norwegian climate journals, I mean, this is not stuff that you think is going to be tremendously noticeable, but yet there it was. Anyway, I'll let our little commercial run here while we're talking about it, because the sound doesn't appear on our end, so we don't really have to worry about it. But we can continue our discussion on the scholarly angle. Rocks were there, goes into all the fun zone. We've got every imaginable cross-reference that we could think of that relates to stuff, all neatly indexed. And it's a thick mother of a book.
It is a pretty thick book, yes.
It's certainly one that is, I think, a legitimate addition to the scholarship. Steve Bauman, who is a supporter of the channel, he helped vet our geology material. And I think it came out as a good-looking visual frame, the off-the-shelf pictures and stuff. It'd be fun to have an illustrated version, but we can't do everything. Yeah. And available at Amazon. Money. We are currently working on ye old... we're knee-deep working on Volume 2. And adding in all of the topics that didn't get covered in the first book, and putting the other half of material on the geological end. If you thought we just kind of grazed through the Grand Canyon, well, you'll find out why, because the other half of that ends up in the second volume. And there will be so much neat material on things we allude to, Tiktaalik, and I think the only major area we really covered basically in the first book, or birds, where all the stuff on theropods and feather development. That's another one that Beckley is insisting they're going to be doing a paper on eventually.
Yeah, good luck with that. Yeah, we cover Tiktaalik in depth in Rocks 2, and I know because I already wrote that section.
Yeah, and I have a
tetrapod transition.
Big stack of material, that some of which I'm sure you've already put in, and others I'll be folding in, relating to that whole tetrapod evolution area, the paleogeography of it. And there will be, I want to have some stuff they'll probably be organizing as info boxes on some of the wind-up on the origins of the jaw, and details then on the homeobox genes and all the various things that are connecting up to that. Because you have to realize that nothing in evolution ever happens in the big saltational poop thing that Beckley seems to imagine, and all this, where they just obsess on the Cambrian explosion. Even with with the limited fossil record that we have today, it's a scattershot of material for the origins of the tetrapod. Still, it's a lot.
It is a little bit, yes.
Yeah, and when you pull it out across time, you see that there's no single spot where suddenly it's going kaboing.
Yeah, the whole, any of the radiations, if we have good, or when we have good enough fossil data, you can see that they're steeped in evolutionary lineages that already exist and that were minor players, and then have suddenly become major players. And that's true for the diapsids, it's true for the mammals, it's true for the various Cambrian lineages.
And when you think about what again, this is a historical matter. I'm a historian, so I kind of think about this, that that as you are expanding your data field, you fill in those little holes, and the one group of people who have not been disappointed by those hole filling ins are evolutionists, because it's gotten more and more rich and fascinating and
There
complex.
have been lots of holes that have been filled.
Whereas
Yes.
Beckley imagines that things have only got worse, that it's more confusing now than it was before, and that he thinks, the origin of Tiktaalik and that all of this is more uncertain than it was before. And I'm going, what are you paying attention to here, kid?
Well, everything has to be getting worse for evolution. It can't be making more sense. Although it's interesting that with the I think back to Steve Meyer's argument a lot. How basically every transition you have another gap to fill.
Yeah,
And
that's
so
Gish's law.
you had you had Ichthyostega and Eusthenopteron, and then there was Acanthostega between those, and then Panderichthes, and then you had Tiktaalik between Panderichthes and Acanthostega, and now actually we have Parmastega between Tiktaalik and Acanthostega. So we have gaps filling within the gaps, and
To be fair, Gish's law was not coined by Gish. It was a snark. I can't remember what anti-creationists came up with the term, but it was one of his various critics back in the 70s and 80s that said, that the more fossil transitions you find, the more missing links there are, because you now have gaps between each one of the new transitions.
Right, yeah.
So
Steve Meyer does that too.
Well, because he's channeling off of that creationism light, that it's a trimmed down, non-young Earth creationist, generic, vague anti-evolutionism. And remember, he tends to avoid most of the Paleozoic on. That he really doesn't dive into it very closely. It's basically the Cambrian explosion and then a little burp in just side issues. Where he tries to flip aside the reptile-mammal transition, another material that we brought up in the evolution slam dunk. And in fact, I think that was one of the sections that Christine Janis would particularly like, the stuff on Steve Meyer's bunch, and also Dembski and Wells, their material. That as I dived into that one, because it's so bloody superficial, and the fossil record has gotten so detailed in here. I personally love it when they bring up dinosaurs. In fact, Beckley brought up dinosaurs stupidly in his debate with Erica, where he tried to imply he riffed off as exactly the way creationists did. There was a paper a few years ago which pointed out that there was an explosive growth of the dinosaurs at the end of the Triassic, and they basically just came over. Fine and dandy. The paper at no point was saying that there was an explosive appearance of dinosaurs, only that the existing one particular dinosaur group, really goes hog wild at one point as circumstances have changed. He keeps on confusing the expansion of a group with the supposed origins of the group. They're not the same thing.
Yeah, and you think a paleontologist would know better.
How could a paleontologist make such a stupid argument?
Unless he's, not confused. He knows exactly the argument that he's making.
And if you had plowed through that multi-hour monstrosity as thoroughly as I have, and put it down, he is that confused. It's a staggering blob of fog bank, to where he has a series of tropes that he attaches to. Not Darwinism, can't be ever Darwinism. It's not gradualist. And somehow there's epigenetics going on. That's important. And I'm perfectly fine with common ancestry. Yes, the evidence supports it. It's perfectly wonderful. But then how do you get body plans? And he seems to think that birds represent a new body plan.
Excuse, what the heck?
No. And this is just nonsensical. No, birds and Shamu the killer whale and you and I
have the same body plan.
They're chordate body plans. Us and the sharks and coelacanths. They're all the chordate body plan. And he he treats that body plan thing like a mantra. In many respects, he's doing a Michael Denton. Denton is exactly that vague as well, to where that body plans only refer to those core structural systems that do relate to the Cambrian explosion period and earlier. They don't relate to everything beyond. Every core date is the same body plan. There is no. Philip Jeanson made exactly the same mistake, but Philip Jeanson was a lawyer, and Denton is a biochemist, but he's a paleontologist. He has no business making that mistake, and yet he does it effortlessly.
I mean, I don't know. I have to wonder because I have actually read some of his technical literature, and it's perfectly fine technical literature. This is a man who has actually contributed to evolutionary biology.
Especially watch if they're ones that are he's co-written with somebody else, to where it's not solo, because that means that it's the committee effort, and basically they're not putting in any directly.
Well, I mean, yes, but at the very least, he put his eyes over it before they turned it in, and I don't know.
In this way, I think he's similar to the schizoid personality of Andrew Snelling, who is okay with geology in the geology articles, and then puts on his young Earth creationist hat and starts talking about the flood. And
I mean, that's
the two
possible.
the two don't seem to do. It would be fascinating to see if those two Snellings ever did a collaborative paper. What could result from it? And it'll be funky to think about what would happen if the intelligent design Beckley ever did a paper with the science Beckley, because they don't seem to be talking to each other all that much.
Right.
Anyway, I think we're past the hour a little bit on there. We put our commercial in. We see everything is about where things are going. We're still on the stream, so if anybody has any comments, last minute things to say, dive them in there. You have anything to freshen things up before we go, Jackson?
Get AAA if you don't have it, because you may break down on the side of the road.
That is a wise thing to do, yes. And they've got like a website app and all that kind of stuff, and that can be very, very helpful. And in our increasingly uncertain world, that's probably a wise thing to do, or have some counterpart of that. AAA is the best one on there. So a unplanned plug for AAA. Okay. Everybody stay safe. If you haven't been vaccinated, do that. There's still a big chunk of the country that haven't done that. We are in the mode where we're about to shift into more normal mode here, but we still got kind of a little mask rule, and I'm perfectly happy to wear a mask when I go to the store, even though I've been vaccinated. It's just the social thing to do. Plus, people don't get to see my mug, and that's a positive, I think.
So, RJ, I've definitely gotten used to wearing a mask. I don't like people seeing my face anymore. So.
Yeah, that may turn out to be the thing of where, people just kind of go into that, maybe we don't need to hug again. And elbow bumps might actually be a standard thing. And it might actually change the way people do things in the same way the behavior changed after world wars and other environments, of where they make such a drastic change on things that people never go back to the old ways of doing things. So we'll find out. Anyway, everybody stay safe and see you all next week. And don't accept any wooden penguins. I know I never do.
Bye, everybody.